Hey guys, Mrs. Lloyd here from home today. A few things as we go through this video. On Google Classroom, I have this PowerPoint posted. You can go through it without watching my video as well and get some of the notes, but I would always recommend at least starting with this YouTube video. Second thing is you're going to want your respiratory system packet that you got yesterday. If you didn't come into the school yesterday, this is posted in Google Classroom along with the PowerPoint. The one in Google Classroom is color, so if you have a color printer at home and you prefer that, you can print it from there. Since you now have your packet out, go ahead and write your potential test date for this unit down as Friday, March 27th. This isn't a super long unit for us to go through, and so that's the goal. Of course, we will be playing it by ear as we see how things are progressing for us. Your textbook would also be super duper helpful to have. This picture is on page 808 of your textbook, and you will see something very similar to that on your homework assignment for today. So as you're trying to identify different structures, you can take a look at that. This picture here is kind of similar. It's a little bit more detailed. Filling it out on the PowerPoint, I don't know, is going to be super helpful. So I'm going to make a scan copy of this and post it in Google Classroom a little bit later today and share it with you guys that way. So you can read a easier to fill out version, and then we'll talk about some of those structures tomorrow. This picture is a very basic view of our respiratory system. And I just want you guys to have sort of our general understanding, basic overview of our respiratory system for today. So we've got our nasal cavity and the nostrils, which is how air gets into our respiratory system to begin with. And right here on the screen, you can see these little folds. And those are part of those concha, if you remember those from the skeletal unit, these extra folds inside of the nostrils, and they're covered by mucous membrane and fleshy tissue, which basically gives more surface area inside. And then we've got the oral cavity, your mouth. Notice how it's kind of faded in this picture because technically your mouth is not a part of the respiratory system. If you have a plugged nose, you can breathe through your mouth, but that's not the best way to breathe. Then you go down to your pharynx, which we oftentimes refer to as our throat. Then we travel down to the larynx, your voice box. If you talk and you have your hand here, you can feel it vibrate. And then it travels down the trachea, which is commonly known as your windpipe. That's blue on the picture there. And then it divides into the two bronchi, or bronchus if it's singular. And there's a right and a left, and it goes to the right and left lung. We're just going to talk about this upper portion of your respiratory system today. So from your guys' packet, this is going to be on page 9. And we're going to fill out just the part up top that's in green for today. So this goes through your respiratory system functions. We have the top part's the conducting zone. The bottom part is your respiratory zone. We're just focused on the conducting zone. So just to make things a little bit bigger, we'll zoom in here. So in that first box, you're going to put conducting zone. If you want to color code, you can. You don't need to. This would be a good time to pause and get some colored whatever you want. Colors aren't important here. But the things in blue here in italics are sort of describing what this term is or does. So when I say conducting zone, I mean the part of your respiratory system that transports air to get to the lungs. So all of those structures I just mentioned on the other picture, they're all just passageways to get air down into your lungs where we actually do the respiration process and breathing. So this is just passageways for oxygen. Think of it that way. So let's go through those structures. And this is pretty much the order in which air passes through. So you start off with your nasal cavity through your nostrils. And as your favorite little characters from Stranger Things would say, you don't want to be a mouth breather. breathing through your mouth actually doesn't moisten your air as much as breathing through your nose, and it dries it out. And so it can irritate, your throat and your larynx if you're breathing through your mouth a lot. So it's much healthier to breathe through your nose. And while you are at home on this respite, you could practice a few nice deep breaths in through your nose. Sometimes they say out through your mouth is nice. You feel stressed because of all of this stuff that's going on right now. Do some nice nasal cavity breaths to calm your nervous system. It's a nice trick from Miss Lloyd. All right. The next structure, when you are doing those nice, smooth, deep breaths, it's going to pass through the pharynx. You guys probably commonly just refer to the pharynx as your throat. So it's kind of the back part of your mouth, and basically where the nose and the mouth meet. The pharynx gets divided up into a bunch of different categories, as you'll see on this video that I play, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Your larynx is a little bit further down, about right here, and this is commonly known as your voice box. So this is what vibrates as you talk. Air continues to pass down, and it's going to go into your trachea, and then from your trachea, which is commonly known as your windpipe, you can even, don't choke yourself, but you can feel your trachea and the little bits of cartilage just underneath your voice box, kind of right here above your sternum, but it runs behind your sternum. And so once it gets down here, you can't really palpate it or touch it very well. But then it's going to branch into those two sides, the bronchi. And from there, and that's your right and left divisions of your trachea. And then eventually, as air goes into your lungs, and we'll talk about that structure in a little bit more detail, but it goes into smaller and smaller and smaller passageways of the bronchi or bronchioles, and eventually it reaches the very end, right? These basically where it hits nothing at the very end. We call those the terminal bronchiole. So bronchioles are just tiny bronchi, hollow passageways air passes through. So they're just the ends. So terminal meaning the end. What is important to know about the conducting zone is, one, it conducts air to your lungs and gets it there. It's just a passageway. But it also does a few important things to our air as it passes through. One, it warms it up. Your sinuses in your nasal cavity do an awesome job of that, keeping it warm. It humidifies it so we don't get dry air coming into our lungs. We want things to be nice and moist. And also, your nose does an awesome job of filtering out any harmful things or pathogens. Like I mentioned earlier, this picture on your notes, this is on the very front, page 1. It's going to be difficult for me to show you clearly in details all of these little marks. So I'm going to scan a PDF and post that, and we'll talk about these structures later. But if you're watching this video and you notice that this PDF is already on Google Classroom or I've sent it to you, go ahead and take time now to copy all of that stuff down. And before we finish out this video, I want you guys to watch 3 minutes and 34 seconds of this other video that describes these passageways. The information on this video is on your notes, so make sure you are paying attention. You can jot a few things down if you want to, but you don't have to, because you can continue to return to this as you need to.
The main job of the lungs is gas exchange, pulling oxygen into the body and getting rid of carbon dioxide. Normally, during an inhale, the diaphragm contracts to pull downward, and the chest muscles contract to pull open the chest, which both help suck in air like a vacuum. And then during an exhale, the muscles relax, allowing the lungs to spring back to their normal size, which pushes air out. When you breathe in, air flows through the nostrils and enters the nasal cavity, which is lined by cells that release mucus. That mucus is salty, sticky, and has lysozymes, which are enzymes that help kill bacteria. Nose hairs at the entrance of the nasal cavity get coated with that mucus and are able to trap large particles of dust and pollen as well as bacteria, forming tiny clumps of boogers. The nasal cavity is connected to 4 sinuses, which are air-filled spaces inside the bones that surround the nose, called the paranasal sinuses. There's the frontal, ethmoid, sphenoid, and maxillary sinus. Those sinuses help the inspired air to circulate for a bit so it has time to get warm and moist. They also act like tiny echo chambers that help amplify the sound of your voice. And this is why you sound so different when you plug your nose, or if they get clogged with mucus during a cold. So that relatively clean, warm, and moist air goes from the nasal cavity into the pharynx, or throat. The region connecting the two is called the nasopharynx, and the part connecting the pharynx to the oral cavity is called the oropharynx. The soft palate, which is the softer portion of the roof of your mouth behind the hard palate, which is the part you can feel with your tongue, and the pendulum-like uvula hanging at its end move together to form a flap or valve that closes the nasopharynx off when you eat to prevent food from going up into the nasopharynx. Finally, there's the laryngopharynx, the part of the pharynx that's continuous with the larynx, or the voice box. Up to this point, food and air share a common path, but at the top of the larynx sits a spoon-shaped flap of cartilage called the epiglottis, which acts like a lid that seals off the airway when you're eating, so that food can only go one way, down the esophagus and towards the stomach. If anything other than air gets into the larynx, then you have a cough reflex that kicks it right back out. Now, once air makes its way into the larynx, it then continues down the trachea, or windpipe, which splits into 2 main stem bronchi. The point at which they split is called the carina. It then enters the lungs, and the right lung has 3 lobes, the upper lobe, middle lobe, and lower lobe. The left lung just has 2 lobes, the upper lobe and the lower lobe. The right main stem bronchus is wider and more vertical than the left, which is why if you accidentally inhale something big that can get coughed up, like a peanut, it's more likely to go into the right lung than the left. The main stem bronchi then divide into smaller and smaller bronchi. The trachea and the first 3 generations of bronchi are all pretty wide.
Okay, guys, that ends what we're going over for today. I got the upgraded version of this video, so this is the only video you need to watch. I don't need to do a series of them anymore. And message me on Remind or send me an email if you have any questions. It's been fun teaching you from my sweats at home today. So I hope you guys are doing well. Let me know if you need anything at all, okay? Have a good one.